this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin. Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. Believe it or not, I got a few horror stories, or let me rephrase that, horror movies that I watch every year. And I think when Halloween rolls around, as dark and demented as this is, I will generally watch The Exorcist. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it reminds me of how much evil there is in the world, because it's truly terrifying. It always comes back to the fact that you're talking about the devil here, you know. I don't know. Is there another one? Well, again, probably... I don't really get into all the Friday the 13th stuff and things like that. It's always stuff that has to do with the spiritual realm that really terrifies me if you're talking about a horror movie. But today, there's another movie that's coming to mind. A movie that came out a few years ago that was directed by Rob Zombie. And the title of that movie was actually The House of 1,000 Corpses. It's kind of a dark, very dark comedy. But the reason that's coming to mind is that we're going to talk about a case today where we are being told that we're looking at 10,000 human remains at one location in Indiana. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, of your own free will, have you ever subjected yourself to the horror genre? And is there something in particular that you can reflect upon? It's like, okay, thinking about horror movies, this is the one that I always go to. It's the one that scares me consistently, or it's something I enjoy just because of the strange nature of it.
I saw the first Halloween movie, John Carpenter, in theaters.
Yeah, wow. The original Halloween, I hadn't thought about that. And that was kind of terrifying because at least at that point in time, it seemed plausible. You know, you got somebody,
I know what you mean.
From a mental institute.
Yep.
And they're a violent offender. Remember Donald Pleasance? You know, he's saying, "I tried to get through to Michael Myers for all of these years, you know, and a decade or whatever it was." So what was he? He was like 8 when he murdered his entire family, and he had no success. So he winds up, ventilating this guy, and the body disappears. That's the ending shot. I hate to be a spoiler, but if you hadn't seen Halloween, I don't know what to tell you. You've been hiding under a rock. But today, Dave, this case in particular actually involves somebody that had been under psychiatric treatment for let me drop this word on you, for a plethora of all kinds of psychopathology.
What is a plethora? Three Amigos. Sorry.
There you go. Another movie reference. It's so expansive that what this individual, Baumeister, had the history leading up to, where we are today. But boy, it's a long and crooked path, isn't it, with this guy?
It's interesting that Herb Baumeister, and we're mentioning movie references and things like that. There's a part of his story, Herb Baumeister, a serial killer, and led a double life. That's something that we don't usually see in the real world. That's a I've always thought of that as some kind of a cinematic trick. If you can't solve this, just make it a double life. Here, he's got this thing over here and this thing over there, and in reality, here, her Baumeister really did have, according to his wife, she had no idea. Now, if a guy's a serial killer and you're married to him and you have no idea, I call that double life success.
Yeah, I'm not gonna mention any names here. I'll say their initials though.
Okay.
Rex Heuermann. And so, you're thinking about a double life and the wife having little or no awareness of it.
You and I need to talk about this away from the show because I don't need a call from a lawyer today, but I do want to talk to you about that.
Hey, look, he's not a serial killer, but I can tell you this, even what is it? Magic 8 Ball used to say, all signs point to I'm just kind of laying that out. And when
is
you
this
look
what your buddy Karen Stark uses, the Magic 8 Ball?
No. Hey, we had a great time with her at CrimeCon, and what the movie Beautiful Mind. What a beautiful mind she has. She is so brilliant, and but that's a tale for another day. We're going to be dropping an episode.
Y'all were the talk of the CrimeCon. I will tell you that
it was something.
Your session freaked people out. I think I'm still getting emails about what you guys said. And anyway, but back to her Baumeister for just a minute.
Yeah,
he's married for 25 years to this woman, and they have 3 children. Oddly enough, and this is I'm going to do the math on this when we're done, but they had sex 6 times according to her in that 25-year period, and had 3 children.
Smokes.
So sure shot Baumeister, was boom right there on that one. But her Baumeister, serial killer deluxe, actually might be 2 separate serial killers in one, believe it or not. The I-70 killer and then the gay club killer. I don't know whether they named him the Fox Hollow murder guy,
Yeah.
That they found the 10,000 body fragment, bone parts. I don't know the actual term for this, Joe. I am sure you guys have one when you have body parts commingled, right? Or bone fragments.
Yeah, well, we refer to it as the commingling of remains.
Oh, okay.
And that's the trick is to attempt to identify of those bones which are, because you can't just assume that all of those remains are in fact human. Because you can have
I didn't think about that. I apologize.
I've got a great aside for you here, and it'll give you an idea as to what forensic anthropologists have to go to. And by the way, for those that don't know, I'm a frustrated forensic anthropologist. I'm what's referred to, if you go out to a scene with buried remains, I'm what's referred to as a shovel leaner. And I sit at the feet of forensic anthropologists. I've always been fascinated by the field, and I've done many excavations. But I'm not the person you go to identify specific bones and try to assess whether or not they are human or not. But a quick aside, allegedly, and I've heard this from a couple of different sources, with Dr. Bass, who founded the Body Farm at UT, there was an exercise that he would put his students through, and you'll get a kick out of this, Dave, where he would have a mass of bones, skeletal remains, and they would be in a big cardboard box. The top is closed; you can't look at them, and there's a hole. There's a hole on each end of the box. He would stick his hand in one end of the box. The student would stick their hand in the other end of the box, and by feel, they would examine that bone together, and the student would have to identify the skeletal element anatomically, and if possible, identify what species it was. And that's by touch. Can you imagine the skill level that's involved in that? Now, if anybody could do it, it would be Dr. Bass. Again, we sit at his feet. He's amazing. And how valid that is, I don't know, but I've heard it from 2 separate people that were part of the program. And when you're talking about, and again, we have to be very clear here, this is not 10,000 intact human remains. I saw a headline, I think, from the Post actually that said 10,000 human, and technically you could say that they are potentially 10,000 human remains, but they are not intact remains. Okay, quick trivia question, Dave. Put you on the spot. When you compare an infant and an adult, of those two, which of those two have the most bones in their body?
I would just think adult, but I guess I'm wrong.
Infant has 270. An adult has 206.
Really? That's a lot. That's a big difference.
That's a huge difference, isn't it?
Why is that?
Because of the fusion of the bones over a period of time. As a child goes through development, bones that were, say, are elements of bones that are let's see, how can we say this? Non-articulated at that point in time, in that period of growth or development, when they begin to fuse together. We talk about growing pains and all those sorts of things. When bones begin to fuse together over a period of time, they create a smaller number of bones, because now you go from 270 to 206. And so as people, go into development as, throughout their early childhood and all the way up until, toward the end, prepubescent, you have this fusion that has taken place. And so you're going to have less bones in an adult than you do in a baby. Isn't that something?
I had no idea, Joe. For real, that's not something that I ever considered. And by the way, and I said this last week or the week before, when you and I actually had a brief chat about growing pains that I always thought was a load. And now I feel horrible about it. But I didn't say anything out loud when my kids. Yeah, it was. Oh, it's growing pains. I thought, what an old wives' tale. That can't be real. Come on.
You've got these various plates that are in the body where, listen. I mean, anybody can reflect on their own personal experience when you know what it feels like. And they're sharp. There's no other pain like a growth pain, and some people experience them to a really intense degree. But when you come across these kinds of cases where you have these commingling of remains, and this is nothing new under the sun, Dave. What forensic anthropologists are faced with at a scene, if you have a serial perpetrator, they don't deviate much in their behaviors. They get into a rut. I've often compared them to carpenters. A carpenter uses a set of tools. They have methodologies. It's a system that is utilized when building a house. And if you've got bits that are, say, bits of wood, 2x4s, that trusses, those sorts of things that have been had to trim, it goes into a pile, doesn't it? Well, there's a certain way those piles are organized because of how they're going to recycle that stuff and utilize it.
Liberate it to take home. Liberate, project.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't going to say that, but it's a matter of getting into a rut where they feel comfortable. This idea you were talking about, things that are used in Hollywood, where you'll have a perpetrator that will intentionally go out and try to recreate the behaviors of another serial killer, and they think they're going to mask themselves. There's always an underlying theme, relative to that would make that very difficult. That's why a movie would be made about that, because it would be something that was so rare. So when you're talking about this Baumeister fellow, he's got a wide open area, Dave. This complex that he lived on was so vast. And out in rural Indiana, which I've been to this area of the country, and absolutely beautiful rolling hills, green, lush land for farming. And this is just outside of Indianapolis. But here's the thing. I don't think that anybody in that little community, anybody just driving down the road, or maybe some family that was out for a drive in the country leaving Indianapolis, they look out over that bucolic beauty of those fields, maybe this lovely home that this guy occupied, and they couldn't even begin to fathom the horrors that had taken place at that location.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
I'm fascinated by a comment you made just a moment ago, Dave, about Baumeister and his wife, that marriage producing 3 children. And she had stated that they had had sex maybe 6 times, I think.
In 25 years.
In 25 years. Here's another little tidbit relative to her. Did you know that she never saw her husband nude?
Yep.
I think that's a huge tell. When you begin to think about the intimacy with which you indwell a structure with somebody, you're going to see somebody's rear end sooner or later, or walk in on them in the bathroom.
You'd think.
You would think, how do you plan your life out so well, Dave? Because that is a purposed task, right? That's a purposed. You're attempting to veil yourself,
right?
Why? How much can you imagine? How much energy that would take over that long a period of time of being, joined with this person and producing 3 kids,
right?
But yet you're not going to see them naked over that period of time. I don't know. It's very odd, dude. Very odd.
When you look at the whole thing with Herb Baumeister, his background, you realize that his psychological well-being, his emotional stability, were things questioned by his family. 6 months after he was married, his father had him committed to a psychiatric institution. So I don't know what happened during that 6 months of marriage, but it had to have been pretty severe that his father had to step in and say, Herbie, we're going to get you away from here for a while. So, and again, I don't know what happened. I didn't read, I don't know that they've written a book about that part, but I'm very curious as to what began or what happened that caused his dad to lock him down for, 6 months into his marriage. I mean, once you get married, you're an adult, you're on your own, supposedly. And that seems like dad was still heavily involved. Or his wife said, hey, your son is really messed up. Can you come help me? I'm going to die.
Yeah. And, his dad was like a very prominent, wealthy physician.
Right. What I'm saying, it's bizarre behavior that led
and listen, this bizarre behavior did not start at marriage, and you can't necessarily control who your kids are going to marry. You'd like to, but they're going to go their own way. They're going to go their own route, and I really wonder if if his wife, looking back over it, I can't take the depth and breadth of it relative to what he had been involved in while she was living under the same roof with him.
Well, getting down to this, Joe, you're talking about somebody in looking at Herb Baumeister as a serial killer. You mentioned a little while ago how carpenters get used to the same tools, the same pattern, the same extra things that are left over when they're done with a job, and how those things are planned out over a period of time. Well, normally within the serial killer world, there are consistencies in what the suspect does in the crime, whether it's where they dispose of the body, the method they use to kill, And yet, when this story is broken down, you actually have two different serial killers in one. He actually is the I-70 strangler, a decade almost of killings along I-70 where the victims were strangled and then tossed aside. And then we have the headline of the 10,000 remains found on the farm property, the Fox Hollow Farm murders. So you got two separate serial killings going on. You would think it would be two separate people. And maybe this goes back to psychological issues. Maybe he had multiple personality disorder or something.
Yeah, he may have. Here's one other thing. Many serial killers are beset by what are referred to as paraphilias, which are these. Yeah, I know, right? They got a name for everything, dude.
Sure. Paraphilia?
Paraphilia. It's kind of a generalized term. Like if somebody has a particular type of sexual proclivity, all right, or they list more. And listen, not necessarily all paraphilias are bad, all right? We have to say that because certain people like certain things. But when you start to get off into these things that become pathologic, he had been identified at an early age as having urophilia, which he had a fascination with urine. And he had actually at one point in time had urinated on a teacher's desk. Now you can say that's antisocial behavior. I think that's not a very far stretch.
Where the teacher was when he did it.
Yeah. But you have to think about, well, what was the motivation, behind this? Was it an undertone of sexual perversion to the point where he was so obsessed with it? He had also been found to be playing with dead animals, which we've heard time and time again relative to development of these folks that have this predisposition. I don't know if it's predisposition, but they get on this track in life where they're obsessed with the dead. They find dead animals, they dissect. I'm thinking Jeffrey Dahmer here. He and his daddy used to go out and looking for animals to dissect. I'm not saying that's I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because let's just say if you're a scientist and you have a child and you want them to try to understand the anatomy of a species of bird that you find, and you take it back, you dissect it. Okay, well that's a learning objective that your child has an interest in the anatomical structures of a bird.
I'm so glad that my boys were more into baseball and football than they were into dead animals, because
I know
we're looking at baseball cards going, hey, did you know that Steve Garvey
yeah, this is a different thing. And so and I don't know if you're in the middle of it, if you necessarily can if you can make some kind of prediction, but when you have a child that is early on diagnosed with schizophrenia and antisocial behavior and all these little elements that come along, and here's the thing, Dave, like I said, his father, I think they moved into this just expansive home. This thing is huge, man. And
you're talking about Herb Baumeister and his wife.
Well, the thing about it is they had occupied, if I remember correctly, this was a family plot that they had, a family residence. They found his child, one of these three children that Baumeister had,
right,
with his wife, was out playing in the yard, Dave.
Right.
And the child actually discovered, I can't even begin to fathom this, a human remain out there. And Baumeister says, oh yeah, well, just ignore that. That's one of my father's anatomical specimens that he had, buried out there. And I'm thinking, I don't know too many physicians that still do anatomical dissections at home. I don't know any of them. As a matter of fact, they practice on things to learn how to suture and do that sort of thing. Generally, those are going to be like pig's feet, where they'll make an incision and they'll practice, suturing and all that to stay up on technique. But, when you're talking about gross anatomy, that's generally something you do in medical school. where you have these cadavers that you dissect to learn, at a granular level, begin to learn about human anatomy. But dude, you got a body out in the yard, and you're going to say that this belonged to your daddy. He was going to use this as an anatomical. And this poor precious child was out there. You imagine digging around, and all of a sudden you come across a skull. Mommy, look what I found. And it's the most shocking thing in the world. So and that's kind of where this kind of all kicks off relative to, placing a remain in his sphere, something that he would have control over, Dave. And you can't, again, I know I always use the term, but it's hard to plumb the depths of it, man. I mean, it really is.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining this sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Brother Dave, I got to ask you something, man. The idea of this case, and it's a fascinating case, obviously, or we wouldn't be, yapping about it today. But this is something that went down in the 90s. As a matter of fact, the alleged, and we have to say the alleged perpetrator here, he was never charged, took his own life up in Ontario. Why? I think our listeners need to understand why this cases, I guess,
right?
Why this has all risen back up to the top? Why is it made a reappearance here in 2024?
When we were at CrimeCon, June 2nd, this story popped up in the New York Post. That's why we're talking about it now, because the New York Post ran a headline: 10,000 human remains found on serial killer's farm, and authorities are still identifying victims. Look. 10,000 human remains found. That, to me, screams 10,000 people dead.
Right.
Human remains. That's not it at all. That's a salacious headline that gets a lot of people to look at it. But
it made me look at it. It made me look at it. Those are battle numbers that you saw in the Civil War.
That's Normandy,
Yeah, exactly. It's nuts. 10,000, and I love the fact that you use the term salacious, because it is provocative. Yeah, and it got this old death investigator to. You're the one that sent this to me.
Yeah, I did.
I didn't seek this out on my own.
I sent it to you because I saw the headline. I'm like, tell me what's wrong with this. But here's the story. Actually says, for years, a peaceful $1 million farm in Indiana hid a dark secret. It was a serial killer's playground. Well, not really. It didn't really sit there dark and secret. They being law enforcement, they were aware of what was out on the farm. They didn't know the numbers, maybe, and they can't identify everybody, which is my question for you, Joe, because when cops finally raided Herb Baumeister, let me back up. Herb Baumeister was a suspect in Indiana because there was in Indianapolis, in the gay community, a couple of gay bars there where a number of gay men went missing. Now, we're talking on the heels of Jeffrey Dahmer being arrested 3 years earlier.
Right.
His crimes were still garnering headlines in 94. And, his was about gay men and things like that. And so this was part of that whole story. And they're like, well, what did this guy do? And, you got your local businessman in Indianapolis. He's got two thrift stores called Save-A-Lot. And he's got a wife and 3 kids. They live in a $1 million farm called Fox Hollow. He's got all of the outward trappings of a successful businessman. And yet his 15-year-old son, as you mentioned a little while ago, his 15-year-old son finds almost a full skeletonized body on the property, buried in a very shallow grave. Some of it sticking out. Hey, Dad, look what I found. What is this? Oh, that's your dad. That's your grandpa's. He had that for some kind of studying. But that's where it all began. In a very brief period of time, Herb Baumeister becomes suspect numero uno in the gay men missing in Indianapolis. And as they start tracking back, the first thing that comes up in an investigation, who is this person? What do they do for a living? Where have they been? Do they have a criminal record? Do they have a psychological record? And boom, yeah, he has been in a mental institution locked down. And so that becomes part of the story in the investigation. But 10,000 remains, Joe. Did they find 10,000 bodies on Fox Hollow Farm?
Absolutely not. That's just not the case. Let's lay waste to that supposition right here. 10,000 remains. Even if you tried to do the arithmetic on that, how busy a serial killer, a singular person, would have to be. That's why I referenced the Civil War earlier.
Yeah.
And I don't think there were any major Civil War battles fought just outside of Indianapolis. So we can check that off the list.
Well,
when they're
Joe,
talking, go ahead.
You mentioned something a little while ago, and you were talking about how sifting through an area to find remains, and you were talking about watching this process take place. And I'm picturing, Indiana Jones and things like that we've seen, and things on the History Channel where you see an area that has string and people walking through with what look like colanders, and they're sifting through sand and finding little bits and pieces. And that's what they were doing at Fox Hollow Farm. They were finding these areas and sifting the dirt, correct?
They were. And here's the thing, Dave. It's not like, you use the idea of Indiana Jones, but if you think about a regular standard anthropological dig, we're going to grid off that area, and you work specific grids. And these grids, first off, you expand it out. So you got huge grids, and then you narrow it down in your search, your initial search. But then you go to, say, a space that might be, I don't know, for sake of simplicity, you'll grid it off so that it's essentially 2 by 2 feet.
Okay.
And you work that individual grid, and you have to go down into the substrata. You go down as far as you can until you get to kind of impacted soil. Everything that's on top of that, you're going to take out and you're going to sift through. And here's the problem with this, Dave. These remains that they're talking about, it's not like someone took a saw and dismembered a long bone and dropped it in a hole and buried it. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, Dave, they literally use the term pulverized. So now, if you think looking for bones that are intact is difficult, when you start to get out into that area where you have not just these pulverized bones, but you've got what we refer to as cremains, which are the burned bone fragments. See, my thought is that you burn a body long enough, again, takes time, creates a visual event, and also creates a smell. How can you be so ignorant of your surroundings if you're part and parcel of this family and you don't have an awareness of it, or what daddy's up to out in the barn or wherever he is? And so after the body is burned, and you talk about being purposed, now you've got to get a heavy object. Let's just think of something like a small mallet, ball peen hammer, maybe a sledgehammer, and you get out there and you set to, crushing these things. And then you've got to take those things and gather them up, and go to a specific area and dump them. Now, you're not going to get everything. No one, even crematories, don't get everything. You can still see evidence of cremains from a crematory where you can identify bone fragment.
As a quick aside, Joe, when my mother passed away very, very young at 52, and her body was cremated, and we did a ceremony out on Ocracoke Island, North Carolina, which is where she was from and loved. And we're on the beach. And I thought cremains were powdery, maybe like sand, because of what I had seen in movies and on TV shows where they scatter remains. And I have warned people ever since, that's not what it is. You actually can identify certain things as bone, as I don't want to say a tooth, but you can actually really identify certain aspects of the body. It's not powder, it's not sand. And that was shocking to me. It really hurt because nobody warned me.
I can't even begin to imagine the depths of your sorrow at that point in time. It's on top of the grief that you're experiencing, you have to go through that. But
and knowing that, Joe, and that was done the way it was supposed to be done, and that's all they could do. I'm thinking, well, this guy out on his farm, he's going to have privacy to pulverize the bones. He's going to have time. That's the other part. He has to have time by himself. And then burning and things. So how did he get, A, the time, B, the time, C, the time? Because you're talking not 3 or 4, you're talking 10, 12, maybe more bodies creating 10,000 bone fragments.
It's an intense situation where you have, and we've talked about this before, where you actually have to have, you have to tend the fire. Okay. And the rendering will take a long time because it's not just dumping gas on the body, striking a match, like you're in some kind of Western movie and throwing it on and everything goes up. It doesn't work like that. You have to feed, you have to have a fuel source. Generally, that's going to mean a really hot burning wood. You think about Tara Grinstead, that case that has been in the news for years and years. And when they burned her body, they had access to pecan. That was in a pecan orchard. I don't know how familiar folks are, but did you know pecan is like a very, very dense wood, and it gives off the highest number of BTUs, which we measure heat with. It's in the same family as far as BTUs as hickory is. So it gives you, and you have to have that kind of sustainable fire source. So if you're going to you could use pine, which is a very soft wood, but it's not as sustainable as like this ongoing heat source. So the more you expose the skeletal remains to heat, the more degradation you have of the remain, degrading. Okay. And you mentioned teeth just a second ago. Teeth are not bone. They're more resilient than bone. And so when you have a cremation that takes place, sometimes you will find teeth. But with cremation, there's two ways. The earlier way that they used to do it was after a body rolls off of the fireproof conveyor belt as it comes out of the furnace. You had these opposing stone wheels or marble wheels like this that spun, and the remains would pass through that, crushing. Okay. Now they have an auger. It's kind of a screw like this, and it screws the remains, the cremains, pass through that auger, and they're crushed down elementally. This guy didn't have access to this. You're thinking about, well, how could you facilitate? And we're talking about, people, we had said 10,000 remains, but what we're looking at here is roughly like 11 remains, and they're still recovering others as well. So you've got all of these elements that are being placed together. Now, do you dig a hole and just simply put them there? One thing we do know, evidence through what the child said, Dave, was that we've got one skeleton that was intact. So that was not necessarily something that he did. We know every single time when he's trying to dispose of a remain. Obviously, he has burned, he has pulverized, he has crushed, but then you're left, Dave. Here's the thing. You're left with this problem as an investigator. How do you get these people ID'd? You've got fragments that are so tiny, so very tiny. And you're looking at it and thinking, well, how in the world do you go about taking a bone fragment and identifying a human being?
So that's what we're dealing with, Joe. We have to get these guys down to the actual victims, people we know that are missing and possibly tied to Baumeister. Now, as we look at this case, 10,000 remains parts. We know that it's not 10,000 people, thankfully.
Right.
But I'm still a little stuck on a couple things here. But going back to the farm and taking it away, because the I-70 strangler is a different thing. Do you know other stories where a serial killer had a method of killing and disposing of bodies and then changed his methodology? He changed what he was doing. We actually have some overlap here. Overlap of the I-70 strangler, where people were, dumped along I-70, and then the Fox Hollow Farm murders or bodies. There's a little overlap. Do we have cases like this?
Yeah, well, most of them are certainly outliers because once they get practiced in a particular way, they're going to stick with that. And I'll give you an example and talk about Midwestern serial killers. You've got kind of a succession here. You'd mentioned Dahmer, but, predating Dahmer, we have John Wayne Gacy. Oh. And, that's Chicago. And then you go to Dahmer, which started in Ohio and wound up in Wisconsin. I think many people forget about his first kill was at that house that his daddy had, that they were living in, where he killed that kid when he was a teenager.
Forgot.
Yeah,
totally forgot about that.
And then we move forward now with Baumeister, and with Gacy. He's infamously, crawl space,
right?
Underneath the house.
But he had been dumping in the water first.
He did dump up in Des Plaines, that river, famously. And I highly recommend, if no one has seen the Netflix documentary about John Wayne Gacy, you got to check this thing out. It blew my mind. I learned things in there that I never knew. But he differed in his disposal relative to those. So the fact that he would change is hard to believe. Particularly, you can see like a one-off event. Okay, I'm rushed. I'm going to get caught. I've just got to get rid of these remains as quickly as possible. The getting rid of the remains, and I'm getting over into my friend Karen Stark's area here, it's part of the ceremony. Let that sink in just for a second.
Wow.
That's part of the ceremony. It's not just about the killing. It's about, sitting there and kind of ruminating over how, we're going to handle the body, get rid of the body. And there's we talked about paraphilias early on. There always is, in my opinion, there's always a element of necrophilia in many of these things, where bodies are posed, bodies are gone back and touched, trophies are taken from the body as a remembrance. And a lot of these things are sexually driven. The lion's share of them are. And so there's a wild fantasy element that goes on with this. So if you're rendering down, and where was he getting these victims, Dave? You mentioned this. And not unlike John Wayne Gacy and also Dahmer, they were cruising. They were cruising, in gay areas. They were targeting gay men. And I think that probably all three of these individuals had real issues with their own personal identity, and they're frustrated. And so that they would lash out in anger for whatever reason. And you couple that with some kind of psychopathology that's going on. But how do they keep a clear head through this systematically with rendering down remains? And I'd be fascinated to know with Baumeister's case if there was an effort at dissection at all of these remains to try to make them manageable. Because one of the toughest things to do is to try to by flame destroy an entire intact body, Dave.
Right.
It's like please forgive me for saying this, but it's almost like, okay, if you and I went into the forest and we cut down a tree, okay, we cut down an oak tree, and we cut a 5-foot segment of that oak tree, and we put it on a burn pile and try to render that thing down. Realize how long it would take us to do that? It's totally other thing if we take that 5-foot section, cut it into smaller sections, and get out our maul or our wedge and sledgehammer and begin to section it off until we've got pieces, right? And the elements will burn more efficiently when they're reduced in size. So you've got all of these things going on, with this individual to try to understand what happened. Have they found everybody? I've seen one estimate for this guy. People always have estimates.
Right.
Maybe up to 45 with this guy. In my opinion, Dave, this will not be coming to a conclusion anytime soon. This property is vast. The lives that he impacted and ended are innumerable, I would think. And particularly if this methodology for disposal of remains is the same one that he stuck with over and over and over again. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
Aldous Hodge returns as Alex Cross, your favorite detective on television, for Season 2 of the hit show Cross, premiering February 11th exclusively on Prime Video. Critics called Season 1 one of the year's best shows, with over 40 million viewers worldwide. And on February 11th, the story continues with a new season. From creator Ben Watkins and based upon characters created by James Patterson, Cross is Washington, D.C.'s most brilliant homicide detective and forensic psychologist. Fresh off his capture of the infamous serial killer The Fanboy, Cross teams up with the FBI to hunt down a vigilante serial killer targeting corrupt billionaires. As the case unfolds, Cross navigates a moral crossroads where the lines between justice and vengeance are blurred. Cross is back and better than ever. This season, get ready for a new case, higher stakes, but the same Cross. Watch Season 2 of Cross. New episodes weekly starting February 11th, only on Prime Video.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.